I'm doing a great work and I cannot come down. Why should the work stop so I can come down to you? These are the words of Nehemiah as he built the walls fortifying Jerusalem over 2,000 years ago, as told in the book of Nehemiah in the Bible. Today we see, just as it was back then, that Jerusalem is the source of heavy conflict in the Middle East, with multiple groups of people vying for control over the ancient city, and global powers weighing in on the conflicts that have been brewing over centuries. Join us as we delve into the mystifying history of Jerusalem and Israel, exploring the ongoing struggles and complexities that have shaped this ancient area for over 2,000 years. Through riveting discussions, we unravel the mysteries surrounding Israel's pivotal role in global affairs, its significance in the Abrahamic faiths, and the intricate web of U.S. foreign policy in the broader Middle East. Get ready to expand your understanding of one of the most misunderstood regions on Earth, here on the Great Work Podcast. All right, welcome back to Great Work Podcast. Today we have Ryan Bellerose. I'm so excited to talk to you. I remember coming across your stuff on TikTok. People randomly just started tagging me in all of your videos. And they're like, he's really good. You should talk to him. And I was like, look through all of them, because I'm getting tagged. I'm like, these are really good videos. I'm really I do really want to talk to you. And then I think I ran into you on a couple lives. You're awesome. You just explain things really, really, really well. And you have a really interesting background, which I think helps you explain these videos. So do you want to tell us a little bit about your background, like how you got brought to pro-Israel activism?
I grew up in northern Alberta, Métis settlement. A lot of people don't know who Métis people are, so I should probably explain that a little bit. We're one of the three Indigenous groups in Canada. There are First Nations, there are Inuit, and there are Métis. So the Métis are from a place called the Red River in Manitoba. And we are basically the children of the first fur traders and Native women. And so what happened was we basically had what's called an ethnogenesis. So we became a people. We created a culture, a language, a specific spirituality, all of these different things that go into creating an ethnogenesis. So we had some disagreements with the Canadian government. Some of them were pretty strong. They ended up culminating in what we call the Red River Uprising, what they call the Red River Rebellion. But we don't see it as a rebellion because we didn't consider ourselves to be part of Canada, right? So we had named an area Manitoba, which in the Cree language means land of God, and we were going to create a confederacy of Native peoples. And the Canadian government, they wanted that land because they were trying to create a nation from ocean to ocean, and we were going to be in the way of that. So they played along and pretended like they were going to listen to us and negotiated with us. And in the meantime, they sent the Northwest Mounted Police to basically forcibly remove us. So we basically fought two rebellions. One in the Red River, which we lost, and then a second one in the Battle of the Tosh, where we lost again. But we did definitely send the message that, Native people weren't just going to roll over. Right, but the problem was there were just so many more white people than there were Native. So at the end of the day, my people ended up in Alberta, in the central part of Alberta, in a place called St. Albert. So if you go there today, everything is named after my family. It's actually kind of funny. So the main street in the city of St. Albert is called Bellerose Drive. The biggest high school is Bellerose Composite High School. So, and it's all named after my three greats grandfather. So I just think it's kind of fun, right?
It's cool.
Yeah. So, but I grew up in northern Alberta, and so when I was younger, I did a lot of different things. I rodeoed, I played football and basketball. But the main thing that I think that interests people is that I ended up in the far north building ice bridges for a couple of years. I ran heavy equipment. I worked with a chainsaw. I did a lot of outdoorsy kind of stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I moved south to go to university. And for a little while, I worked as a security contractor. So, basically babysitting people, with a gun. And it was a fun job. It was interesting. It was a definite part of my life that, I learned a lot. I traveled a lot. At last count, I think I've been to over 35 countries.
Wow.
So I've been to a lot of places. Then I started working for telecommunications. It's so funny because how do you go from all these different things? I got an office job working for a telecom as a business analyst, and then as an account manager for small, medium, and large businesses. So that was kind of an interesting job. And that one's the funny one because that's when I started getting more involved in advocacy. But my last job in telecom, I made probably about 3 or 4 times what I made doing advocacy. So this whole myth about, the Zionist gold that we're all supposedly getting paid with, I'd like to see some of that money because I've never seen any of it.
Same.
And I'm sure you feel the same way. It's kind of like, well, where is all this supposed Zionist gel?
I know. I'm jealous that all of the pro-Palestine supporters have apparently been approached for deals by Zionists. Where is mine? But
I know. Yeah, it's and I always tell people, look, I'm not arrogant, but I say it constantly. It's a saying that I used to use when I was playing football, right? A coach actually said to me once, he said, "You have a really healthy ego." And he said, "It borders on arrogance." And I said, "Well, it's not arrogance if it's confidence born of demonstrated ability." And he just kind of looked at me and he was like, "Touche." He's like, "Okay." Because it's true. Like, it's not bragging if you back it up, right? But you have to back it up. And like, I think my track record in the advocacy world kind of speaks for itself. Like, I'm definitely not one of the more famous people, but I could argue that some of the stuff that I've introduced into this discourse has been paradigm changing. I mean, like, and I'll be blunt. Like, when I started talking about the indigenous nature of the Jewish people and their connection to Israel as an ancestral homeland, there weren't a lot of people doing that, especially not in the mainstream, and surely not in the indigenous activist world, right?
mm-hmm.
And, so part of our problem in the indigenous world is that in the 19th, Yasser Arafat made a trip to America, and he specifically met with a bunch of native leaders from the American Indian movement, AIM, right? And that resonated because he knew how to talk to them, right? He went to them and he basically sold them all of the lies that we now know are just abject nonsense. But think about this. If you're a native person who's never really studied history and never traveled, and you're really just intensely focused on indigenous rights, and someone comes to you and says, "Oh, we're just like you. Like, we're poor, pitiful brown people, and white European colonizers came to our land and stole it." Well, of course, you're going to naturally say, "Oh, okay, well, we have common cause then," right? Now, we know from studying the actual history that that's not even remotely true.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is that they had, almost 50 years to spread that bullshit. So you have 50 years of an entrenched narrative that we're now trying to fight against. So we're not starting from an equal level, right?
Yeah.
Like, when I started doing this, I can remember actually being told, "Ryan, you're one of the smartest people I know, and as long as I've known you, you've never been wrong about anything. How can you be so wrong about this?" And I'm just literally like, okay, so literally until 20 minutes ago, you thought I was the smartest person you know and that I'm never wrong. But I just told you something that was so mind-blowingly paradigm changing for you that you're positive that I'm wrong without even checking into any of the stuff. Like, you didn't check my facts or anything, but yours, like, I went from being the golden child to being persona non grata. It was actually really enlightening, right? Like, I tell my Jewish friends, listen, when I tell you that the left me, I'm serious. Like, I was pretty far left. I wasn't a communist by any stretch, and I was always very socially conservative. But I mean, I believed in a lot of progressive things. I believed, like, society should be looking after the weakest and the poorest in society. Like, we should be helping them, not putting up barriers. I believe in the rights of women. I believe in the rights of minorities. I believe in the rights of gay people. Like, I literally, if you did a checklist, almost everything that I used to believe in, and still believe in mostly, were liberal values, right? What they call liberal values, but which more and more are starting to become conservative values, which is really such a weird thing.
It's interesting. I wonder if Arafat knew how much the left over the next 50 years after he met with those leaders, and he kind of came up with the whole Palestinian identity thing in the 60s and 70s. I wonder if he knew how far the left would go to just like only caring for the little guy, and just like this weird activism where you just kind of parade around these minority groups and say, we champion their cause now, but they don't really do anything for them. And I
Yeah,
wonder if Arafat could see the writing on the wall or if he just got lucky. But you're right. I mean, they've had a 50-year head start, and it's
yeah.
really bad now in
Oh, yeah,
North America.
absolutely. I would say this. I would say the Russians, the people that were actually the brains behind Arafat, they knew which direction they were going to be driving this. Like identity politics, the idea of, like the underdog always being right no matter what. Like all of that stuff has its genesis with basically KGB propaganda. And I know it's funny because now conspiracy has been turned into a dirty word because so many conspiracy theories are out there. Some of them have some tiny germ of truth, but the reality is most of them are just batshit crazy, right? So you end up with like this is what I always tell people. There's a world of difference between saying, the official narrative is a little bit sus. There's some things on there that don't really match up and don't make sense. And then there's a world of difference between that and it was the Jews, which like 90% of conspiracy theories end up turning out to be, well, it was the Jews. So it's like, yeah, I believe absolutely that the left wing was driven intentionally by the KGB, and this is not just an attack, and we have to be clear about this. This is a culture war, right? Like the Russians learned a valuable lesson by watching how the Americans defeated them in the Cold War. The Americans didn't have to defeat them militarily. They just had to keep building stuff. They just had to show people that capitalism is a better system for the little guy than communism, right? Because the truth is, both of them focus on dragging wealth upwards. Communism supposedly is about sharing everything equally among everyone, but like George Orwell said, some animals are more equal than others. So, the people in the party gather the wealth, and the people down low, their status never changes. And the problem with capitalism is that it's in the West now, it's kind of morphed into corporatism, which
Mhm.
is not good. And so the average person is seeing wealth being dragged upwards, and instead of being concentrated in the middle class like it was in the 1950s and the 40s and 50s, right after World War II, now wealth is being concentrated and focused in the upper strata. And, like you got CEOs making 300 and 400 times what the average person makes. Like it's absolutely insane. And that system is not tenable because it's too top heavy. So now you have the average person who's sitting here and thinking, okay, so when they talk about corporatism, are they socialists? Like, are they commies? Like, I don't know. And it's like, no, we're just people that are paying attention. And we think that even though capitalism as a system might be better, it still needs a hard reset because young people can't afford homes. Going to school is becoming more and more expensive. And it's getting to the point where you can't even get a job at a fast food place without a degree. So, like, what happened to, like, people like my dad who never went to college, but started a company running heavy machines, built up a pretty significant amount of money. At the end of his company, he had 450 people working for him, pipelining. So, I mean, but, how is somebody going to do something like that nowadays? Like, how are they going to create wealth? It's just not tenable in this system.
Yeah, it's fun. I grew up super conservative, just my family was, in like the typical conservative small business owner, that kind of thing. And I remember something changing when I got to college and I realized studying religions how different other cultures are. And I'm starting to realize, like, well, I think capitalism is really great. I just don't know if it works everywhere, you know? And then
Yeah.
having the epiphany moment that, like, everything we value in secular democracies, capitalism, is seen as our greatest weakness by our adversaries, like
Yep.
Russia, like you said. They
Yeah.
can totally use freedom of speech against us. And actually,
Mhm.
the first episode of my podcast, I talked a lot about, like, are we going to have to put some limits on speech in order to protect the value of free speech? And I don't know the answer to that question, but people much smarter than me are starting to toy with those ideas.
Well, that's the thing, right? Like free speech absolutists, they're the kinds of people that think that it's okay to yell fire in a crowded theater because they're free speech absolutists, right? I have never been a free speech absolutist because I understand that certain kinds of language, like dehumanization and demonization, always lead to bad things. Like, there's nothing good can come from that. I think, look, it's funny that you brought up the college thing because, like, my dad and I talk about this a lot. Like, if you're a young person and you're not a liberal, you have no heart, right? And I can't remember who it was. Somebody famous said this a long time ago. But if you're a young person and you're not a liberal, you have no heart. But if you're an older person and you're not a conservative, you have no brain, right? Because your life experience is literally what's going to dictate things. So when you're young, you should be, full of piss and vinegar and want to change the world and want to make things better. I mean, that's the hallmark of a good person, is to try and make things better, right? But if you get older and you haven't realized yet that a lot of the things that we think when we're young are maybe not the way the world really works, well, then you weren't paying attention. You don't have much of a brain, right? And I'm not saying you should stop trying to make things better, but what I'm saying is that, you learn very quickly that, like the legal system, it's a legal system. It's not a justice system. It's designed for a certain thing and it achieves what it's designed for. It's not for the average person. Like, and there is no such thing as justice anymore. Like, the only way that we can have justice is if we make justice. I know that's going to sound a little bit extreme. I'm just
No, it's interesting. I mean, first of all, I think that quote is attributed to Churchill. So I think,
yeah,
according to Churchill, I have no heart. But I think it's interesting because I think the breaking point for me and a lot of people is, and this is kind of where you can put yourself as either a liberal or a conservative. Do you need everyone around you to change, or do you need to change yourself?
Yeah.
And if you think the world would just be a better place if this person, this person, this person thought like you did, well, then you might be a little bit more liberal. And that's like kind of the communism of like, well, my life would be better if these people just gave other people money. But as you get more conservative and you say, okay, well, what can I do to change other people's minds?
Yeah.
And I think that's where advocacy comes from too. Like, I posted a video on October 7th, which went viral. I don't know why. And I'm really mad because none of my videos can go viral since, because I get mass reported. But, and I kind of toy with this, like, do I quit or do I keep going? Well, if I quit, I can't complain anymore that people don't see things my way. And I don't care if people don't see things my way after they watch my video, as long as I've gotten my point across. And I wonder because you get mass reported a lot too. So do you go through that mindset or those thoughts?
I've been lucky because I'm on like my 5th Facebook account, right? Like I was on Facebook before Facebook was really a thing. I was the head of security at a hospital. Well, not really head of security. I was like a shift supervisor at the hospital for security. And all the nurses were using this new social media. And at the time, I was on MySpace. And I didn't even really use it because like MySpace was kind of lame, right? But all my friends had it. So I was like, whatever, I'll get MySpace. And then all of a sudden I notice at work that all these smoking hot nurses have this app where they're like all visiting and chatting. And they're like, Ryan, you should join. It's so cool. And then they'd be like, look, I got pictures of my vacation in Cancun. And I'm like, so whatever. I made a Facebook account. And then very early on, I only used it for 2 things. There was this video game called Warbook, which was like an insanely popular game, but it was text-based. And I used it for that, and then I used it to talk to these nurses, right? That's all I used it for. And then somebody invited me to a politics group called Vox Populi, and I ended up meeting, I met a tutor. Like, I basically wanted to learn more about Islam because I was reading about Islam on Facebook all the time. And I engaged a tutor named Johannes Georgilakis. And it's funny because he ended up, a couple years later, like, we became pretty close. An hour or two every 3 or 4 days, I was learning about Islam, and it ended up he became the digital propaganda guy for ISIS. So yeah, you can Google his name. It's actually a pretty funny story. It's a long story, so I can't tell the whole thing here. But long story short, I sent his wife some money so that she wouldn't have to go to Syria. They were living in Egypt when I met them, and then Egypt kicked out the Muslim Brotherhood when Sisi came into power. And because Johannes was a member of the Muslim Brotherhood, he ended up leaving, and he was going to go back to the United States, but instead he decided to go to Syria and take his pregnant wife, who also had 3 small children, with him. And I was like, dude, you can't take a pregnant woman with 3 toddlers to Syria. There's no doctors there. Like, give your head a shake. So he actually said, okay, well, I just don't have the money to send her home. So I said, look, dude, I'll send her some money. So I actually got put on a no-fly list, and I didn't even realize it, right? I was put on a no-fly list because they thought I was sending money to terrorists, because I sent money to my friend's wife to get the hell out of Syria. Yeah, it's kind of a funny story.
You have the best stories.
Well, the funny thing is, like, being involved in advocacy, you kind of get like you get put into situations that you probably wouldn't end up in otherwise. Like, I was pretty active on Twitter on my first account, which was actually King Fenris 69. And the reason it was called King Fenris 69 was because I played for a football team called the Wolf Pack, and my name Ryan is actually means little king, right? So when
Oh,
I was younger, my nickname was King, and I guess because I was a little bit bossy too, right? And so my football number was number 69. So King Fender 69. So I was always arguing with like these random Jew haters and random people that hate native people. And then one day this lady, she's kind of famous. People know who she is. She started sharing a lot of my tweets. And her name is Roseanne Barr. And yeah, so she started just randomly sharing my tweets. And I just figured, what the hell? I'll add her. So I added her on my thing and I started following her. And we started talking by private message. And it was really funny. She's a really nice lady, really sweet lady. And she said, "Listen, I'm going to be in Ontario for a comedy tour, and I'd really love to take you for lunch." And I said, "Well, how about this?" I said, "How about I'll organize like a little lunch for you and I, and you don't have to do anything. You can just show up and we'll hang out." And she's like, "Yeah, absolutely." So I was at the time working for a Jewish organization called B'nai B'rith, and my actual immediate supervisor, who was the director of the League for Human Rights, really nice lady, Amanda Homan. I'm still friends with her, still really close. She says, "Hey, I heard about this thing on Twitter. Are you seriously going to have lunch with Roseanne?" And I was like, "Yeah." She's like, "I'd love to join you guys if I could, and then maybe we can try and see if there's any kind of potential for collaboration and advocacy." And I was like, "Yeah, that's a great idea." But then somehow our CEO found out about it, and the CEO, and they just invited themselves along, right? So they showed up, and it was funny because they kept interrupting. Roseanne and I were having a really great conversation, and she's actually really smart lady. Like, a lot of people don't know it because, look, she's really bombastic. She says some really out there things.
mm-hmm.
But if you really pay attention to her, she's quite intelligent. And she said that my CEO kept interrupting, and finally she looked at him and she said, "Listen, I don't even know who you are." She's like, "I'm here to have lunch with my friend Ryan. So if you could just be quiet while we talk, that would be awesome." And I was just like, I was trying so hard not to laugh because I mean I don't want to piss off the CEO, but yeah. So anyway, it was pretty cool.
Roseanne is so I didn't grow up watching Roseanne. But it might be, I don't know when the show was really popular, but I would have been pretty young. And my dad was kind of a soon as dinner's over, we turn on Bill O'Reilly kind of guy. So that's what I grew up watching. But Roseanne, I don't know. I don't know how I came across her last summer. And I was like, she is hilarious. Like, she's an icon. And every one of my friends is like, how do you not know who Roseanne is? So I might be one of her only 5 listeners to her podcast, or I actually think she gets a lot of listeners because she has a lot of advertisers, but she, no one talks about it that much because I think people think it's a little out there, and it is, but she is hilarious. Just the way she talks about, like, what did she get in trouble for? The Valerie Jarrett thing where she said that
Yeah,
she
she
was,
did. Yeah,
yeah.
Muslim Brotherhood and Planet of the Apes because her haircut, like, I swear to God. And the funny thing is, I got really upset with some pro-Israel people because we had a mutual friend named Hen Mazik, and he was friends with Roseanne too. And he just threw her under the bus. And I got really pissed off because, like, he's pretty lefty and he's, identity politics. And I said right off the bat, the second I saw it on Twitter, I literally wrote, because you didn't say anything wrong. Like, we didn't know, nobody knew that this Valerie Jarrett was part black. She tells everybody that'll listen that she's Iranian. So that was where the Muslim Brotherhood joke part, right? And she had this really horrible bowl cut that looked like a really bad haircut from a 1950s TV show called Planet of the Apes, right? So, like, it was literally, I thought it was fucking hilarious. Sorry, effing
That's okay.
hilarious, right? And but all these people just got like so butthurt so quickly, and then it was scary to watch how quickly the pitchforks came out. "Oh, she's so racist. I can't believe she said that." And I think that a lot of people took that opportunity because she was also saying stuff that was like pro-Trump.
Mhm.
She was saying stuff that was very conservative. And I think a lot of people just took that opportunity to pile on her for those views, not necessarily for what she said. And I think that was really one of the first times I saw cancel culture really go after something.
I have found, so, I got involved in the pro-Israel stuff because I was into politics. Then I got into the pro-Israel. And then I was still super passionate about Israel, studied it in college, but didn't do as much with it. But I realized my whole time after I was kind of woken up to like the problems going on and stuff, because I knew nothing when I visited Israel. The people who get canceled the hardest, torn apart in the media the most, are always Jewish women. I don't know if you're familiar with like influencer culture, but there's two fashion influencers that were huge on Instagram, like could do nothing wrong. And they're both openly Jewish. I have never seen anyone get hate like them. And it's not even Ariel Charnas and We Wore What.
Oh, okay.
And it's like, oh, the husband is stealing money from the company. She's stealing money. She's a terrible. And I think, okay, there are arguments to be made that like women get bad press more than men if they run companies, that kind of stuff. I've never seen anything like, nothing these women do is good enough. And then the same thing with Roseanne, and she's Jewish. And I just think there's something there, and it just goes to show there is some implicit bias against Jewish people, Jewish women, that I just think you can't argue with. I've never seen people go after. There were other people who were canceled, like Roseanne, around her time. That was like peak cancel culture. But I think others have recovered or didn't lose as much as she did. She was kicked out of her show, killed off in a violent way.
I have never been as angry as when I saw that, because like people that owed her their entire career not just threw her under the bus, but like did it on a way that was just so over the top. Like I honestly, like, I know she's forgiven a lot of them because like I said, she's a nice lady. She's a very sweet person, right? I haven't. I don't think I'll ever forgive those people. I said flat out, I will never watch that show again. I don't even watch that network, because I honestly think that when you do something so profoundly evil, like what they did to her was evil, and I just can't. And the thing you brought up about cancel culture, yeah, lots of different people have gone through cancel culture, but you notice there's another constant thing. The people that get canceled the hardest are the ones that say sorry, right? The ones that actually apologize. And part of that problem is because they don't hear when you say sorry, I think I said something that I shouldn't have said. They don't hear sorry. They hear, I was wrong. You should come and get me. Like, I see your pup.
Sorry.
But yeah, that's okay. I love dogs. But yeah, that was such a terrible situation.
You're right. It's always the people who say sorry that get in the worst trouble.
Yeah, because like people see that as weakness. One of the things that's actually always really kind of bothered me about social media is that if you admit you were wrong, that's seen as a weakness. If you've seen my videos, you know that like my original TikTok account was called Ryan Knows Things. And the reason I called it that is because I do in fact know things. The problem was that, every now and then there might be a subject that I'm not conversant on, which is rare because I'm a little bit of a polymath, right? Like I kind of know a little bit about a lot of things. But there are some things I know a lot about. And then there are some things that I don't know a whole lot about. And one time I was actually wrong and I made a video and I went on and I said, listen, I took a person that I thought had a lot of credibility and I believed something they said a long time ago. And it just kind of, over the years, I didn't even look into it because, I learned something from somebody that I trusted. And I said, and it's a valuable lesson for everybody, because just because you trust somebody doesn't necessarily make them a good source. And I learned that something somebody had told me wasn't in fact true. So I made a video. I said, listen, I was wrong. Oh, we got a little bit of reverberation. So yeah, I made a video saying that I was wrong. And then, people were like, oh my God, you don't really know anything. And I was like, okay, so we have somewhere in the vicinity of 3,000 videos, and one had a factual incorrect thing, and then I corrected it. I don't understand why I would lose credibility over that. I would think that should help me gain credibility. Because in the real world, I would trust somebody who's willing to admit when they're wrong and will flat out say, yeah, you know what, I was wrong, and here's why. I would trust them far more than somebody that says, I'm never wrong, But
You're right. You're right. Well, and then if you there's two places we can take that. In my opinion, the most annoying thing about doing pro-Israel advocacy is they're so quick to say when they do something wrong.
I was going to bring that up. That's going to come into, that's why I brought that up, actually. Because Israel, I think that you're right. One of the things that they do wrong is that, look, they think by telling people, okay, we were incorrect here, and, this is why, and so we did an investigation, and this is what we found, and this is what the facts are. They think that the average person is going to say, oh, yeah, you know what? That makes sense, and good on you, because you were wrong and you admitted it. Right? That's what they think is going to be the reaction. The actual reaction is, well, if they lied, right? They don't say they made a mistake. They say, well, if they lied about that, then what are they hiding? Because the stuff that they're hiding must be way worse than what they just admitted to. And it's like, they literally just showed you that they're not hiding anything. That's the point. But these people that are, they're all predisposed towards conspiracy theories now. So everything is like, well, if they admitted to this, what they're hiding must be way worse. And it's just like...
And by the way, the whole notion that, like, obviously the Jewish state must be hiding thing feels very anti-Semitic to me.
Yeah.
But yeah, they admit every time they do something wrong. And it's just like, I mean, I'll see pro-Israel people talking about, we know sometimes the IDF gets rough with Palestinians. We don't like that either. It's like, no, I've never seen a Palestinian ever be like, we're sorry about the terror attacks.
Yeah.
Like, that's on us. We're sorry about that. It gets a little, no, they justify everything they do. And just in general, when you punish people for apologizing when they do wrong, because they're punishing Israel at this point with this propaganda war. And this happens through all parts of life. Then you're boosting people who don't care if they get things wrong or don't care if they lie. Exactly. And that puts the worst types of people in charge.
Oh, yeah. I think that for me, the reason that I get so heated up about this is I see an immense amount of untruth coming from the other side. And I've always said this, if your cause is just and valid, then you don't need to exaggerate, you don't need to twist the truth, and you don't need to tell lies, right? So that tells me automatically that where we're coming from here is definitely, it's a binary conflict, and I do believe it's good versus evil. And some of my, even some of the Zionists on the app don't agree with me. They say, oh, you shouldn't do that. And I think you have to do that. Because I look at it like this, it's really simple to me. The Palestinians claim that they are a tiny minority. They claim that they are persecuted and heavily oppressed. And yet none of their actions would suggest that they are living under the kind of oppression that they talk about, right? Like, if Israel was anywhere near as oppressive as they claim, they would not be comfortable showing their faces on social media. They would just not be comfortable with that stuff at all. Yeah, my main reason for bringing that up is that they will literally, like, just invent things out of whole cloth. And then they will push that with a straight face. And so when somebody like me comes along and says, hey, you know what? That's not really the way the history worked. They get really upset. And that's when I started getting like death threats. And, my personal favorite are the very humanitarian, anti-racist left-wingers who tell me that, I should drink more whiskey like all the other Indians who sold our land for whiskey. That's an actual comment on one of my videos. Right? It's funny too because I don't even drink, which makes it even more humorous. Literally, I'm a teetotaler. Like I think the last time I had alcohol, I had beer battered fish and chips a couple weeks ago. So this is but this is kind of where we're going, And the Israelis, very different people. They don't do this stuff like that. Like they say, look, I'll be blunt. Israelis tend to be pretty blunt, to the point where they're not really good at small talk. They're not really good at like pretending to be interested in something, but at the same time, they're a very warm people. When you get to know them, they're like incredibly impressive people. So
yeah, and then how do you defeat that, right? How do you not Israelis being warm, open people, right? But how do you defeat the whole? On one hand, if we're talking about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, it really bothers me when people say like, well, really? Is this a proportional response? Aren't they going too hard? Like, you're mad, and they just don't understand war. You know, you don't win war through proportional conflicts. At a certain point, the amount of evil that Hamas showed and are unwilling to apologize for and just actually say, well, we're going to do that again and again, that you can't defeat that with a handshake. They're not going to go away with that. But on the same side, how do you defeat evil with evil? You know,
Yeah.
like at a certain degree, you need to. I think
Yeah.
war
Well,
is horrible, but at a
to
certain
be
point,
honest,
you need to do it.
I don't know that war is evil. I'm more of a von Clausewitz kind of guy. I think war is just the extension of politics that uses violence. Right? I don't necessarily know that it's evil. I don't ascribe a moral value to it unless it's a war against evil. Right? Like there are demonstrably, objectively evil things in the world, like ISIS, right? Like Hamas, like the Nazis. You have to go to war against those things. If you don't, then you are, by definition, enabling evil, right? But I do think that it's important to understand certain words because, like, that's the other thing that the other side does, right? They attempt to redefine certain words because they know that certain words evoke certain emotions, right? And we joke all the time about the Pallywood checklist, right? And we play pro-Palestinian bingo. Like we play it because it's the only way to stay sane. Because we see them on a daily basis misusing language. And I think that most people when they actually listen to this, they're like, oh yeah, I never really noticed that, but now that you mention it, so they changed the definition of the word genocide. And why did they do that? Well, because the definition doesn't fit what's happening in the Middle East right now in Israel, but they want to have that emotional response that talking about genocide gets you, right? They want to have that. Same thing with ethnic cleansing, same thing with apartheid. I mean, they use the word apartheid even though they know some of their most their bell cow activists like Mohammed Al-Kurd was caught on video saying, yeah, we know it's not really apartheid, but like we say apartheid because we want people to understand what it is. And it's like, no, you want them to understand what you think it is, right? And it's insane because like I look at it like this. When I have a conversation with somebody, it's an opportunity for me to learn and for me to teach, right? I want to learn what they think and why they think it, and maybe I want to teach them a little bit about what I think and why I think it, and maybe some of the facts that they might not be aware of. Right? The problem with the pro-Palestinians is that facts are like anathema to them. Like they cannot abide being told what the facts are, and you see it constantly. Like the other night, you were on that live. I'm talking to some Palestinians, and one of them makes a comment about we were the Jews, like we were the Jews. And I was like, really? And then so the conversation kind of evolved. And then another person brought up the fact, well, what about the Temple Mount? And they were like, there was no temple there. And it's like, well, if you were Jews, you would know that that's where the Jews believed their temple was. It's like, so what you're saying is that you're the real Jews, but the Jews were never there. But if the Jews were there, that you're the real Jew. Like, they can't be consistent.
Well, and their book that got nothing wrong, according to them, said Muhammad flew back there on a donkey to build it on top of Solomon's temple.
Yeah. Yeah.
Your
That's
book
why, look,
says it was the temple.
yeah. So like the religious, this is one of the reasons I stay completely out of religious arguments, even though I could argue that I'm barely conversant with both Judaism and Islam. I've had tutors in both both religions. I've studied that stuff. People that have watched my content, Jewish people, have said, you know more about Judaism than most people that I know. And I've had Muslims actually tell me, wow, like I had no idea how much you knew about Islam, right? Because I've spent the time and the effort to learn. But my problem with using religious arguments is that like, a religious argument like God gave it to me only works if you believe in the same God, right? You have to believe in the same God because otherwise there's no point. And more importantly, like you have to have that belief in common, and then you have to have some sort of discourse. And they're not willing to have that. Like you've seen it probably as much as anybody because I see you on TikTok lives a lot, and I like
One of my worst
and I notice that you're and you do something that most people on our side are not really great at. You listen, right? And I wish more of our side would learn that let them talk and they will tell you what they believe, right? And I've been trying to convince people for over 20 years that the Palestinians do not want a two-state solution, the Palestinians do not want the existence of Israel at all, and that the Palestinians are literally the barrier, the impediment toward peace, because they do not want an Israeli state, period, full stop. And I've had people, mostly from the left, consistently call me Islamophobic, say that I just hate Arabs. And now it's really edifying for me to see people coming on that are from Jordan, like Maz from Jordan. I mean, there's so many of these people now that are Arabs and Muslims from all over, and they're coming on and they're saying it. And they're saying, no, Ryan's not Islamophobic. He's just saying what they actually say. And we hear them too. And yeah, what they say in Arabic is very rarely what they say in English. So what he's telling you is the truth. And it's very edifying for me. Like it feels good to have other people saying, hey, you know what? Like, this guy was right the whole time.
That is the biggest thing. I mean, if you just let them talk and ask them questions, that's all you need to know. Like, these people who want to get on there, it's a mental illness that I suffer from, I think, that people just want to get on these lives and like fight with people. So I'm like probably number one that like needs some sort of treatment for that. But like, and I'm probably going to stop doing it as much. But it's like a weird thing where like these people will start to say something and then they have to jump down their throats like, no, this is what actually happened. It's like, well, wait a minute. Let them make the point they're trying to with whatever bullshit they're spewing.
Yeah, and then refute it.
Just, or not even refute it, just ask them a question about it. Like, okay.
Yeah.
So
I try to avoid the question.
Oh yeah.
Like, I don't like to answer questions with questions, but like you said, I like to direct the conversation by asking a question. But I hate when they answer a question with a question, so I don't do that to them. I think, yeah, I probably just misunderstood it.
No. It's more like, I think, like, I took a lot of pre-law classes in college too, and what's the lawyer thing? You don't ask a question you don't know the answer to. Well, I kind of have these people figured out, and I know what their answer is going to be. And it's not going to have any basis in logic, usually. So when someone says, I know you guys and what you guys think, what do you mean, you guys? What do you mean? Who are you referring to? Zionists. Oh, okay. Oh, then why did you just protest outside of a synagogue? I just made a video the other day, which is being suppressed. This girl is mad at Kim Kardashian for posting that she went to a bat mitzvah and dared to post about Starbucks during this time. If anti-Zionism is not anti-Semitism, why can a celebrity not attend her friend's Jewish religious ceremony in Los Angeles?
Oh, exactly. I once attended one of the funniest protests that I ever went to. There was an anti-Hanukkah protest in San Francisco.
What?
Oh, yeah. So a friend of mine messages me privately and says, hey, there's a protest tomorrow at 4. There's a Hanukkah dinner, and these people are going to go and protest it. And I was like, what time? And he said 4:30. And I said, okay, I'll be there at 4 o'clock. And he said, why? Why go there early? He said, most of them probably won't even show up till 5 o'clock. And I said, well, I'm gonna let you in on a little secret that I learned when I was doing native activism. If you want to protest somewhere, you get there first. If you want to get the best spot with the most visibility, you get there before anybody else and you set up before they do. And he's like, well, what are you going to do? I'm like, well, I'm going to go and I'm going to find the best place there and I'm going to set up there so that they can. And they'll have to have their stupid little protest somewhere less ideal. So I went right to this building and it had a really nice big walkway and a big, like, right out in front. And I stood right in the middle holding an Israeli flag, right? So when they started showing up, they were like, we're having a protest here. You have to leave. And I was like, yeah, I don't think so. And they were like, no, you have to leave. We're having a protest. And I was like, yeah, I don't really give a shit about your protest. So you guys can go protest over there because I'm going to stand right here. And I'm 6'4" and 300 pounds. So yeah, that's how it is. And so they got pissed off and they went and actually told a police officer to remove me. So the cop came over and he said, look, these people want to have a protest here and they said that you're blocking. And I said, that sounds like a them problem, not a me problem. And I was like, so I'm going to stand here until I feel like I don't want to stand here anymore, which will probably be around, 7, 8 o'clock tonight. And the cop is looking at me. He's like, I can't protect you, right? And I started laughing and I looked at the cop and I'm like, do I look like the guy that needs protecting? Like, look at those people over there. They look like a freaking cast of Star Wars. Like, they look like aliens. Like, and they're like 3 feet tall, like Oompa Loompa size. So I'm not overly worried. So the cop starts laughing and he walks away. So I stood there, and then they tried to crowd me. So they started to try and threaten me by crowding up and all walking close to me. And I'm laughing, and I'm like, you realize if you touch me, that constitutes assault. And if I feel like I'm afraid for my life, I'm entitled to defend myself with any means necessary. And every time I would say that, they would like move away from me, right? Because they realized like if they touched me, I was gonna drop a hammer on them, right? So as I'm standing there, they start trying to film their protest. So they had a Filipino girl talking about how Israel supports the Philippine government in oppressing the Filipinos. It's like, it was so ridiculous. Then there was this one kid named Christian something or other. He was from Stanford University, a gay black kid. And he was talking about how Israel only supports the rights of gays in order to cover up how mean it is to the Palestinians. Because, gay rights totally take a back seat to the Palestinians. So I'm standing there watching this, and then one of them says, all the Zionists are inside because they're afraid of us and they won't come out here and deal with us. And on their video, it's so funny because they didn't edit it because these people are so dumb. They made the video, and in the video they say that, and then in the background you can hear me saying, I'm right here, asshole, because I was standing there holding an Israeli flag. And then so what I started doing was when they were talking, I would just wave my flag over top of their head. So if you watch the videos that they made, they cropped. Like they would move the camera down slower so they could keep the Israeli flag out of it. It was one of the funniest things in the world. And then on Twitter, one guy posted, stupid white cracker shows up at the Palestinian protest to derail our protest. And then I actually took that picture that he put with his caption and made it my signature picture on Twitter. Because everybody that knows me knows that I'm Métis, right? So I was just like, because all of their talking points, they have a script. And they literally go, first thing they'll say is, well, you're a white European colonizer, so you're not allowed to talk. Then they'll say, oh, well, you're a racist, so you're not allowed to talk. Then they'll say, you just hate Palestinians, you're an Islamophobe. They have like a whole checklist of reasons why someone's not allowed to criticize. And so what pisses them off is that their checklist doesn't really work on me.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's one of my little stories.
No, I love the stories. What's your favorite story from all of the activism?
Oh my God. Favorite story. Okay. So there's this guy, Steven Salaita, right? A couple of years ago, he was a teacher, and he was being hired to teach at the University of Illinois, at Urbana-Champaign, right? And Robert Warrior, who is a native, Osage Indian, by the way, he's kind of an idiot. And he used to argue with me in Indian country. There's a native newspaper called Indian Country Media, right? And I had written some articles in there that basically said, stop mixing the Palestinian nonsense with the native rights struggle because we are not the same. So then he would write these really, really terrible articles that he was DEI before there was DEI. He was the guy that basically got his degree based on, I'm an Indian, you should give me a degree. So he writes like a 5-year-old. Like and that's like being generous. Like, I'm being nice here, right? So we had all these arguments. Now, he was in charge of hiring somebody for the Native Studies department at the University of Urbana-Champaign. So he was going to hire Steven Salaita to teach Native Studies. Well, a few of us found out about it, and, we wrote a few emails and said, listen, we don't think that an anti-Semite who says really horrible shit should be teaching people, let alone people that want to learn about natives. So he wrote a book called Cowboys and Indians in Palestine, another one called Israel's Dead Soul. Like, he's a terrible human being. And so these 3 teenage boys had been kidnapped and murdered in Israel. Mm-hmm. And he wrote, as a response, I wish all the settlers in the West Bank would go missing, right? And then he wrote something about Zionism, making anti-Semitism a good thing since these are the kinds of tweets that he was, oh yeah, like, it's crazy. So we sent screenshots of these tweets, and they basically had already hired him, and then they got these tweets, and they're like, whoa, nope. So they unhired him. You don't see this very often. They literally just said, we withdraw our offer, right? So old Stevie, he didn't like Ryan very much, right? And so he starts doing the speaking tour. This is the best part. So he does this speaking tour, and where he's going to all these different universities talking about how his freedom of speech was shut down, and like people that speak up on behalf of Palestine are being silenced by the man and all this stuff. And so my alma mater, the University of Alberta, is on his tour list. So I decide I'm going to go watch. And so I go to his speaking engagement. So he starts talking, and I'm sitting in the crowd. I'm not, there's only about maybe 100 people there, mostly little old ladies, a couple native people, and I'm sitting in the back, and I'm listening, and he's just bullshitting. Like, his whole story is not what happened, right? And it basically turned out that he blames, like, he said some Jews attacked him, and then he said those things, but it wasn't, and he wouldn't really say what he said. He kept referring to the tweets, but he wouldn't admit what the tweets were. They kept saying my tweets were anti-Semitic, but they weren't anti-Semitic. And then people were actually, like, in the crowd, you could hear them saying, well, what were the tweets? Let us judge for ourselves, right? But he wouldn't. So I'm sitting in the back. I don't say a word. And then he opens it up for questions. Now, during his talk, he makes a comment about how I'm such a gentle person that I can't yell and I don't ever raise my voice. And my 3-year-old son, he knows that. So it just makes me so upset sometimes because he makes me mad, but I can't yell at him. Oh, yeah. Yeah, it gets better. So I'm laughing because that's like such a, like, look at poor pitiful me. So I stand up and I say, hey, Stephen, Ryan Bellerose here. This is my alma mater. So I just want to ask you a couple questions. And he goes, Ryan Bellerose? Are you the Ryan Bellerose that goes around to pro-Palestinian events and agitates and asks stupid questions? And I was like, no, I'm Ryan Bellerose that comes with the facts. And I was like, so I have a couple questions for you if you're willing to answer them. And he's like, I just want everyone to know Ryan Bellerose is a paid agitator. And he's like,
Oh,
and so of course some of the native people know me, right? So they're like, no, he's not. Like, you could see, like, they went from being on his side to all of a sudden being, So I said, Stephen, you keep saying that Jews are colonizers, but it's the Arabs that colonized the Middle East in the 7th century, right? Like, in the Hijaz. They left the Hijaz and they conquered and colonized the whole Middle East. So he starts talking over me, right? Because he doesn't want me to say, because he knows what I'm going to say. He starts talking over me. It starts getting louder and louder and louder. So finally, I played football for 20 years. And I was one of the guys that called the signal. So I can yell. And I have a really, I can project my voice, right? So I took the mic and I said, Stephen, I thought you said you never raise your voice and your son makes you cry because you can't raise your voice. I was like, seems like you're okay at raising your voice. He stops and everybody just kind of looks at each other and they're like, yeah, he did say that. And then they took the mic away from me.
Oh.
And I was like, I was like, okay, I'll go sit down. So I sit down, and then he starts going into his spiel again about how Jews created terrorism.
Oh, God.
So that's when I had enough. And I said, really? Jews created terrorism? And he's like, yes, they did. And I was like, what about the Hebron massacre in 1929, Stephen? Like, are we going to talk about that today? And right away, he's like, I need to have him removed. He has to be removed. And I'm like, let me get this straight. This is being sponsored by the Native Studies Department at the U of A, because it was some Native Studies props. And afterwards, I dealt with that, by the way. I was like, and you're going to have a Native person removed for questioning the lies that you're telling. And you could see a lot of the Native people that were like, and then one stupid girl was like, we came here to listen to him speak, not you. And then one of my Native friends was like, I don't know, I'm kind of enjoying this. It's like, yeah. So anyway, I left. They made me leave because it's the U of A and they're very woke. So I leave, and the next day he writes this big long thing about Ryan Bellerose came to my event and tried to ruin it. And I was just like, you're such a turd. And by the way, he got hired by the University of Beirut after this.
Well.
So it gets better. He got fired from the University of Beirut for being too anti-Semitic.
What?
Yeah. I can't make that up. Like,
no.
I can't, if I was going to write a story, I couldn't make something like that up. Yeah. So now he's a bus driver. Not that there's anything wrong with being a bus driver. I mean, one of my best friends is literally a bus driver. He's a great guy. But I just think it's funny that this guy went from being this supposed noted academic on a meteoric career rise and now he drives a bus and he blogs about how terrible Jews are.
Well, and that kind of goes back to the original point of like capitalism, communism. Ultimately, anti-Semitism rises when people are having economic uncertainty. Like
that is, I'm so glad you said that, because that shows that you pay attention. That is something that most people don't notice, but it's absolutely one.
Like every society that's turned on the Jews, it was because economic downturn was like starting to be felt by like middle classes and lower classes. Because middle class is kind of a regular, like a new phenomenon, like somewhat new phenomenon. So, well, not somewhat new, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, I know what you're saying.
So, that's like when people ask me why I care about it. And like, even if I get frustrated for a minute, I keep going. It's like, sure, I'm not Jewish. I have Jewish friends. I want all people to feel fine. But at the end of the day, I can tell our society is heading down a very bad path if anti-Semitism is this rampant and the conspiracy is this rampant. And I don't know how we stop it.
Yeah. I think that at this point, it's a runaway train, right? Like I look at, like when I'm looking at this stuff, I got to be honest here. They use what we think of as our biggest strengths as our biggest weakness. So they use the freedom of speech, right? They use our desire to be an open and pluralistic society. They use our desire to allow other people to come here to build a better life, right? And they use it very cynically. Like there's a concept in Islam called Dar Islam, and it basically means that any kind of country that has been conquered by Islam must always by nature be Islamic, and if it's not, then they have to fight to make it that way, right? They also have a concept of immigration that a lot of people don't know about. And basically, what it means is that if you can't conquer a place through military means, you immigrate there and you slowly become the majority. And once you become the majority, well, then you're by nature an Islamic state, right? And they've been doing that for years. And the sad part is that there are a lot of people who came here from the Middle East to escape persecution. There are people that came here from the Middle East to build better lives. My mother passed away when I was 14.
I'm sorry.
And the woman who pretty much adopted me is a Lebanese Maronite Christian woman. And her son is one of my best friends. And he's probably the most Canadian that ever Canadian, right? Like, he's got a Canadian flag on his arm. He served in the Canadian military. He saw combat with the Canadian military, which is pretty rare because Canadians are more likely to say sorry than go to combat, right? Mm-hmm. And like he served in Bosnia, he served in Iraq, he served in Afghanistan. This is a guy his credentials as a Canadian are beyond reproach, right? But he's Lebanese Canadian. And there are people that think because he's Lebanese that he's somehow less Canadian than they are. And I'm telling you, he is the most Canadian. And the reason I bring him up is because I don't see this as a us versus them insofar as it's us versus the Middle East. It's not. It's a culture war. And there are people in the Middle East who understand that Islam, in the way that it's practiced in the majority of the places it's practiced, is oppressive and is a problem. Not just for women, but for religious minorities, for gay people. It is a problem, right? It's demonstrably a problem. It's an ideology that goes directly against almost every value that Western liberal democracies hold. Like equality. You cannot have equality in an Islamic theocracy. Because if you are not Muslim, you are by definition not equal to a Muslim, period. If you're a woman, you are not equal to a man. So automatically, there's two things right there that are they're anathema. They cannot work. So do we say then that we are at war with all of Islam? No, because there's also streams of Islam. I can't remember what they're called right now, but the mayor of Calgary used to be one. Ahmadis, Ahmadi Muslims. Ahmadi Muslims are they're much more open. They're much more pluralistic. They are not a problem. The problem is that most streams of Islam are not like that, right? So you can say that, you know what, we don't want that stuff here. I don't want to live under a Muslim theocracy. I don't. Because I'm a native Canadian that follows Cree spirituality. So according to them, I am a pagan. So they're going to kill me. They'll give me the opportunity to convert before they kill me. but they have to kill me because I'm a pig. And where did I learn that from? Well, I learned that from Johannes Georgilakis, who was actually a friend of mine, who became the head of propaganda for ISIS. ISIS knows a little bit about Islam, So, yeah, it's a problem, and we have this culture war happening, and it's scary because we're not just allowing it, but a lot of us are helping empower it. Like the left, who claim to be pro-minority, pro-woman, pro-gay. They claim all of these things, and yet somehow they've aligned themselves with the one ideology in the world that is completely opposed to all of the things they supposedly advocate for. And we can't make it make sense. But what we can do is draw attention to it, because I think more and more young people, I mean, TikTok aside, where we had those people posting letters of support for Osama bin Laden.
Yeah.
But a lot of young people now are starting to wake up and starting to realize, wait a second, like, I am going to be directly impacted by this. Like, I keep telling all of these young gay people that are so pro-Palestine, like, you remind me of chickens advocating for KFC. Like, it makes no sense. There is no sense here. Like, you have to start paying attention. And this whole all of us or none of us, like, here's the thing. If it was up to them, it would be none of you. Like, all the people that you're supposedly fighting on behalf of, the gays, the women, the religious minorities, when they say all of us or none of us, they're okay with none of us. They'll tell you point blank, okay, well, the gays, they can live as long as they don't be gay, right? They're going to have to convert to Islam, and they're going to have to quit being gay, because being gay is clearly a choice that you make, so you have to quit being gay. The women, well, you can't quit being women, but you could be a Muslim woman, and as long as you wear a burqa, then you're okay. You can live, right? And then, like, the religious minorities, well, yeah, sorry about your luck. You're just going to have to be Muslim. It's just the way it is. Or you can pay an excessive tax and be a dhimmi. Those are your choices.
And what's crazy is Islam means to submit, right? So their whole thing is submission, and like submission by force is fine. It's very odd to me as a Christian that the final word of my God, that considers Jesus a prophet, just flies in the face of everything he taught throughout his life, but that's whatever. But there are Muslim societies and Muslim countries that have become very attractive to Westerners, and all of them could be. I mean, Dubai left the extremism 20 years ago, 30 years ago, paid British contractors to move in, build this metropolis. It's like the safest, cleanest place in the world. Now, part of the reason it's safe is because they know a thing about law and order, and like, I don't know if they cut people's fingers off for stealing there, but they bring the hammer down hard. And so people don't steal. In America, I mean, they could attract people to convert to Islam that way if they wanted to, but like, I was talking to Maz about this, and he was saying, like, there's this weird thing where we have this inferiority conflict, and like, we must make people, like, our book tells us that we're going to be, the closer we follow the Quran, we get to rule the world. And we've got ISIS, who feels they closely follow the Quran, and they do not run the world. And so they just go more and more and more extreme, but it's actually the source of their demise. Yeah. And if we can just expose that, maybe things will work. But it's kind of like true communism's never been tried thing. True Islam's not being followed. So,
well, that's literally the argument against ISIS, right? Like, they say, well, ISIS is not true Islam, but Islamic scholars say that ISIS is probably the closest to an actual Islamic caliphate since the original caliphate, right? And yeah, it's the no true Scotsman fallacy, they call it, right? You're not truly doing it. It can't be real. The thing that bugs me about all of this is really simple, right? So Christianity, you could argue that they don't follow the teachings of Christ himself, right? You could argue that they're Paulists, which means like the Catholics follow the doctrines of Paul rather than the teachings of Jesus, even though his doctrines were based on the teachings of Jesus, but then he kind of added his own kind of flavor to it, right? Because people forget that, like, Jesus was pretty chill. I've read a lot of stuff, because I grew up Roman Catholic. Most Métis people, just for the viewers, most Métis people were Catholics because we were forcibly converted. So it's just a thing. But I grew up Roman Catholic. So I wanted to know everything there was to know about Jesus. When I was a kid, My whole thing was I was going to become a priest because I wanted access to the Vatican vaults so I could see all the secrets because I was a nosy kid, right? I always had to know everything. And what I learned when I was learning about Jesus was really interesting stuff. You know, like you have this guy who seems like the kind of guy you'd want to sit down and have a beer with. Like he just seems like a genuinely chill dude, right? And then somehow, some way, that religion turned into, oh, you don't believe in the Trinity? Well, we have to kill you then, right? Like Bishop Ambrose of Milan is the guy that has one of the most famous sayings in the history of the world. Well, what do we do? There's Christians among those people in that city that believe as we believe. So what do we do? And he says, well, we'll kill them all and let God sort them out, right? Like, and unfortunately, that became one of the things that Christianity became responsible for. It's the reason behind, you know, what happened to my people in North America, right? Because the Christian imperative is either you become Christian or you go to hell. Well, by extension, what that means is it says, well, if you're going to go to hell if you're not Christian, well, then maybe we have to send you there, right? Like it's a really unfortunate thing because I don't think most Christians think that way, especially not in the modern day,
Yeah.
right? But now the difference is that with Islam, Islam is very clear on who needs to go. And unfortunately, who needs to go is pretty much everybody that's not Muslim. So, you know, it's a doctrine that it's inherently dangerous and that it's something that, you know, we do need to talk about, but anytime you talk about it, you're at risk of being canceled. And, you know, like somebody like me who believes in traditionalism, I support all of these Middle Eastern peoples that are trying to regain their indigenous spirituality. They want to go back to worshiping the Creator and interacting with the Creator and the land the way they did before Islam, right? So people like the Amazi, people like the Copts, the Kurds, the Assyrians, the Yazidis, all of these different groups of people, even, you know what, even Arab Palestinians, the ones that are Aramaean, the ones who literally were Christians and who were there before the Arab influx, I would totally support them regaining their indigeneity. But it's such a difficult conversation to have because when I do that, people like from the left will say, well, you're just being anti-Semitic. And I'm like, no, I'm not. Oh, but Palestinians are Semites. I'm like, yeah. Yeah, I saw you roll your eyes. Dude, you've heard that argument so many times too, right?
That's like
The term was coined by a German anti-Semite to make Jew hate more clinical, and they're trying to steal that even. Like,
well, and to by the way say that they're not actually white. They're from the Middle East.
Well, there's so many. Like, we could probably do an entire podcast just on the bad arguments that they make and the good arguments we use to refute them. The simple truth is that their entire argument boils down to Jews are white colonizers from Europe and therefore evil, and that Palestinians are local, poor, pitiful brown people who had their land stolen. That's their, you know, and in the reality, like, all you have to do is look at somebody like Ahed Tamimi, the blonde-haired, blue-eyed girl that used to be famous. We call her Shirley Temper because when she was a little girl, they always had videos of her yelling at soldiers and shit.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, she's about as white as it gets. I mean, you see these people, they're called Bosniaks. Their literal relatives, their ancestors, came from Bosnia to get away after World War II because they were part of the Bosnian SS, right? Like, yeah, there's so much of this stuff. But you know what? I don't want to take up too much of your time.
That'll have to be another episode for another day.
Yeah, exactly. There's so much because, like, I actually kind of wanted to. It's too bad we didn't have time, but like, I really wanted to get into talking about the live culture with you because I think that you've actually helped change that.
Oh, well,
and I think that I think there's a few people. Like when I first went on, there were really only one or two pro-Israel voices that I heard that were pretty common, and I noticed that there was one lady. She's pro-Israel, but she doesn't really debate much. But she does provide a good platform. That's that Joelle, right? Mm-hmm. And I mean, like, she seems like a nice lady, but she's not exactly like, you know, she's not a debate giant. Like, she provides a good platform and she tries to moderate it, right? Then there's people like Hebrew Hammer. You did one of these podcasts with him. Mm-hmm. Brilliant guy, right? And he's one of the people I think that kind of helped really change that culture too. There's Nick, you know, Dino Rider. He's, you know, but then there's a lot of other people that are maybe smaller content creators that are really good debaters, and like they're really solid with the arguments. And we see them, like, you know, we see quite a few of them, and lots of Israelis that are starting to step up. But I remember when I first started doing this, I saw your live. I saw a Jewish girl named Jess. And I
Yes.
saw it was very like it wasn't really a community when you started doing this. And I really do believe that you and a couple other people really kind of tried to build more of a sense of community. And I think you were successful.
Well, thank you. That's really sweet. I try to do it because for me, I needed a place with all my comments. Like these people are morons. And if one moron wants to come talk to me about how they're a moron, fine. And I don't like talk to them that way when they're on the live necessarily, but it's how I feel with 99% of them. But there's a few notable exceptions. But I either want to do lives to have like a fun, really smart conversation with someone like you, or just have fun and have a community around like a shared experience. So that's what I like to do with that. But thank you. But thank you again for coming on too. I don't want to keep you too much longer. Is there I'm going to tag all your stuff in the comment or in the post. Is there anything else you want to promote?
Not really. I've always I want to say this, right? I think that the best people on social media, and not just this app, but in social media in general, we understand that this is a cause. It's not a competition. That's why you see some of us that support each other. Like we share each other's videos. We like and comment. We try to help the algorithm. When we're on a live, we try to give space to other people. Yeah, we have some people that are a little bit ball hoggy, but at the same time, like we do try to make sure that everybody that we think has a good voice can have that voice heard. And I think that that's the best way to do this going forward, right? Like we hear the same arguments over and over and over. So what we should be doing is we should be making a list of people who engage in bad faith, and none of us should be platforming those people, like the Holocaust denier types, the H group never did anything wrong types, the show me the proof of the women that were raped. Like, really? Really? Like the New York Times, that's not good enough for you? The New York Times literally saying, we've seen the DNA evidence, like that wasn't good enough? At this point, those people don't sound rational, right? And that's another thing real quick. That'll be the last thing I want to wrap up with. I think that we are rational people. And so we try to rationalize the irrational. They are not rational. They aren't. They just aren't. And they will come with a straight face and smile while describing things that we know are objectively untrue. And we need more people to educate themselves to fight that. And I think that your podcast, your TikTok, my TikTok, other people that are doing that, we are the resistance. We're the good guys. And we need to keep doing what we do, even though we know it's a thankless job. We damn sure aren't getting any of that Zionist money. But we keep doing what we do. And hey, you know what? I think we do make a difference. I think that it's important for us to keep doing what we do.
Well, thank you so much. I'm going to stop recording.